So this means, let him, jnānin, not unsettle the minds of the ignorant who were attached to action. The enlightened man doing all works in the spirit of yoga should set others to act as well. So in this verse, Sri Krishna is talking about a truly knowledgeable person who will never try to unsettle someone else's mind. So this sentence, actually, we should try to understand this properly, so I'll say that again. A truly knowledgeable person never tries to unsettle someone else's mind. So in society today, people feel that when they learn something new, or when they read something new, or they think about something new, or understand something new, immediately he becomes determined to change everyone else's way of thinking. And, to indicate to the other person that what they're doing is wrong, and that, they want to try and change that person's mentality and move them in a different direction. And often they try to do this, and then an argument will follow, because Sri Krishna, as Sri Krishna said, is that a truly knowledgeable person will not try to unsettle the minds of ignorant people. If someone's performing an action with faith, then don't unsettle their mind. But at the same time, if that person is doing something wrong, you should not let him do something wrong. But what we should actually do is make our own actions great, in order that the person who's ignorant will see us and get inspired by the way in which we act. You can't pinpoint to them what they're actually doing wrong, because the consequences of that is that the person has faith in what they're doing, and they're not going to leave it very quickly. If you just say to them, look, what you're doing is wrong, they'll see you as attacking their faith or their belief, whatever it might be. So no person ever likes to leave the faith that he has, because he has believed in that and he's created that faith himself. You're proving him wrong, and there's very few people in the world that like to admit that they're actually wrong. So, say for example, smoking, depending on what other people view as perhaps a bad habit, often people will say, look, smoking is bad, don't do it, it's injurious to your health, it will cause lung cancer. But say, for example, that particular person, he's a smoker, and he knows that cigarette smoking is wrong, and say, for example, you're, a pure, knowledgeable person that's devoted to God and might have a great personality. If you go to him and say, look, don't smoke cigarettes, he's not particularly going to listen to you, because he admits that this is a weakness of his, and he has a thirst for cigarettes, and his body will actually crave them. So, he won't really be able to argue back with you, because even though you know that smoking is wrong, he'll just say, look, we can't really discuss this anymore. I crave it, I know it's not right, and I can't change it. So by saying to him, look, you should not do this, you shouldn't actually do that, because you shouldn't try to unsettle his mind. What you should actually do is do good actions yourself, perhaps not smoke yourself, and therefore by that he will learn that, what am I doing? I'm doing the wrong thing here. You should make your own principles so great and give such a great example of yourself that the person in front of you will actually realize their own faults, so that his faults will actually hurt himself, as in the example, Guruji uses thorns, and says that he will leave this fault himself. And this type of person often won't really improve just by talking at them. And Guruji goes on to explain that the Gita is quite applicable to the modern age, because nowadays often, we joke around with our elders saying that they're always telling us to do this or telling us to do that, and, that I know that my grandparents will say, we always tell you to do this, but you don't learn. And, they just keep talking at us and saying that if we don't do something, then so-and-so will get worse. But this actually won't improve us. What they should actually do is carry out great deeds themselves, and we'll watch and see, because I'm sure lots of people say watch their grandparents or their parents and see them doing great things, and you imitate those things. And that's an echo of the previous verses where human beings follow, great deeds. And Guruji goes on to explain that there's lots of differences in the way in which people think. No two minds are ever the same. When you're talking to someone, they may be thinking on their own experiences and drawing on their own thoughts and examples. And the way in which you perceive a particular thing might not necessarily be the same as the same way in which they perceive that thing. So when you're talking to someone, they're often translating it in their own language and their own heads. And everyone has their own thoughts and their own practices. So Guruji is giving an example of where he was in an ashram called Prempuri, and this was about 16 years ago, and there was a Bhagavad Sapta, and on the 6th day of the topic came up of Rukmani's love letter, and this is actually a love letter between her and Sri Krishna, where she discusses the main points to look for in a future partner, and Sri Krishna and Rukmani's wedding comes up. So as the Guruji was going through the 7 verses of Rukmani's love letter in detail, and the Sapta had finished for the day, everyone had come up to greet Guruji and to do a pradakshina. And one woman came up to Guruji and said, I've got a son who's 28, and, I'm wondering if you know a girl who'd be appropriate, and someone who'd be good enough for him. And is there anyone in this community where you're holding the sapta that I can introduce my son to? And Guruji jokingly said, look, I don't do this business, I'm not in the matchmaking business. But then, as he went home, he started thinking about everything, and he was thinking about the discussion that had been held about Sri Krishna and Rukmini's wedding, and the fact that, you know, in this particular lady's mind, she must have been thinking of her own son and her own son's wedding. So while Guruji was talking about Sri Krishna's wedding, in this lady's mind, you know, she was thinking of her bachelor son who was 28. So this is just an example to explain that, you know, when we say a particular thing, perhaps other people are interpreting it in a completely different context, but so that it's reflective of their own lives. And everyone has their own world of thinking and their own experiences. And each of these experiences is important to that particular person. You can't necessarily ask a person to leave those experiences, because whatever that person is thinking is actually important to them. And if you just tell them that, look, that's not right, you shouldn't be thinking about this, it won't necessarily work. So a truly knowledgeable person will slowly, very slowly, show the person the right path of action rather than just talk at them. They show people through their own lives. You know, they don't forget or leave their own principles, but their own principles become an example for other people. So, you know, Gandhiji very famously said, my life is my message. So my life is my message. And in fact, you know, to this day, lots and lots of people think back to the lives of Gandhiji and everything that he has, you know, taught people, or how he's inspired people. So through his own conduct, you know, he's actually shown people, but not through any other means. You know, through his own conduct, it's more powerful than any other means. So a person who shows someone how to act through their own conduct, which is the acharyans, that's a true teacher, and that means an acharya. So an acharya is not somebody who takes over when the principal retires, but someone whose conduct we should follow. And he shows his message through his own conduct in life. And some people say to just do what they say, but not what they do. And if people tell them to say, forget the bad side of them, it makes us wonder why they don't change their own bad sides first. So Sri Krishna says in this verse that someone who wants to change other people must practice the thing in their lives first, because such a person practices what he preaches. And you can see this in his life. So just like in the Sanatana Dharma, we have the Gayatri mantra. I'm sure all of you have heard in the Jain religion, they have the Navkar mantra. And it's actually a great mantra which goes as this. Om Namo Aryantaram, Om Namo Siddharam, Om Namo Aranayayam. And this actually means I bow down to Aryanta, I bow down to Siddha, and I bow down to Acharya. So as we just saw, Acharya, the meaning of Acharya, it makes you wonder, why do they bow down to Acharyas? Because these people are those people that practice what they preach in their life. Now there's also another reason not to settle other people's minds. When you give someone a final decision, they haven't necessarily had the time to digest it. You know, say for example, you're telling people not to be attached to things, not to be attached to shoes or handbags or anything else. You know, they're filled with attachment, and you're teaching them the values of non-attachment and putting those into their heads. But if you start talking how they should be free of karmas and how they should be non-attached, then that's sort of like Guruji likens us to a raw leaf falling from a tree. So the example here is, you know, you have a tree, and when a person becomes mature, that's the difference between a ripe leaf falling from a tree and a raw leaf falling from a tree. So when a ripe leaf falls from a tree, it's become ripe and it becomes a natural process. It's not pushed. And, you know, when a ripe leaf falls from the tree, then the other ripe leaves also start to follow, and they follow like a natural process. But when a raw leaf falls, you know, the tree sort of gets damaged, and actually a ripe leaf falls, you know, the tree doesn't actually get ruined, it just continues to progress. When a raw leaf falls from a tree, the raw leaf starts to decompose. But when a ripe leaf falls from a tree, it doesn't decompose, it just dries up. And when a raw leaf burns, there's no smoke. But when a ripe leaf burns, when a raw leaf burns, then there is smoke. But when a ripe leaf burns, there is no smoke. So a raw leaf, in this sort of analogy, is just like a person that is all talk, and a ripe leaf is like a true religious person. So such a person shows his message through his life, and when he's with others, he also behaves accordingly. So basically now there's two concepts that Guruji talks about. The first one is Buddhi Bhed and Buddhi Yog. So that's Buddhi Bhed and Buddhi Yog. Because whenever there's a fault, it's not the fault in the action, but actually in the intellect. So Buddhi Bhed is basically means uneven intellect, and Buddhi Yog is an even intellect, which is united with God. So when you have Buddhi Bhed, which is this intellect which is united with God, you know, you attain peace, and a person that has Buddhi Bhed gets a lack of peace. And Buddhi Bhed has an unsteady mind, and Buddhi Yog has all doubts and all sort of questions and faults are destroyed within their mind. Buddhi Bhed leads to the creation of doubts and faults, and Buddhi Yoga is Siddha Prajna, which we saw in the previous chapter, or someone that's settled in intelligence. And Buddhi Bhed is an intelligence that never stops running. Buddhi Yoga, on the other hand, is when anger, greed and lust have gone, and Buddhi Bhed is when anger, greed and lust are still there. So there's two differences here. And this verse teaches us how to behave with other people when we are non-attached, and not to try to unsettle other people's minds. And the next verse will actually show us how this type of person will actually behave.